I want to just talk a little bit briefly about the Supreme Court case. We've talked about this in the past. It was queued up. The case is Moore versus United States. And there's really some questions about the way that the plaintiffs have presented themselves to the case and to the court. And more information came out this week, and I'll get to that in a moment. But this case, you'll recall during the 2020 primary, Elizabeth Warren floated a proposal, and I think Sanders has certainly been talking about it broadly, the idea of a wealth tax. This is as opposed to an income tax. Income tax is a tax that you get levied on money that you make in any given year. A wealth tax would look at your assets and tax the value of those assets. Now, the first thing you hear from, just coincidentally, really wealthy people,
wealth managers,
is that there's no way to make that assessment. Now, we do this every day in this country. In fact, not only do we do this on probably the lowest level, the smallest level of government that we have, like counties, I think, or towns, when they assess the value of your real estate without it being sold.
Yeah, they go into your basement and check if your ceiling's like finished and stuff like that.
Or they just drive by and they make a guess and whatnot, and it's always under what it's valued at. So the idea that we can't physically do this is absurd.
We've tried nothing and nothing works.
You can definitely assess people's wealth. You may be undercounting, but if people want to be a little bit more transparent, that's fine too. So the idea that Warren had in particular was any American that had over $50 million, they would have to pay a 2% tax on that. So if you add, and I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I can't tell if this was a marginal tax, or let's just assume though, the worst case scenario for you as a 50 millionaire would be that you got to pay $1 million. This is assuming you're not making any money on it, but $1 million on that 50 million each year. So,
but isn't it over 50 million too?
Well, you'd be over 50 million.
So say you had $100 million.
I think maybe it's taxed on that second 50, but I'm just saying the worst case scenario because I'm not sure it's marginal, but let's assume that it's not even.
Okay.
If it's $100 million that you have, you either pay $1 or $2 million depending on whether it's marginal, and so on and so on.
That's going to hurt.
I know that's going to hurt.
I mean, the finish on the yacht is just going to be so outdated.
And it goes to the government,
But
too.
Of course, what we're really talking about are people like Elon Musk and billionaires, where the idea that they'd have to pay $200 million and then they would be off the list. I mean, excuse me, not $200 million, $20 million, right? What is it? I don't even know what 2% of $2 billion is.
That's how big those numbers are. It's difficult to conceive of them.
That would be 2% would be, I think, $20 million.
But
is that what it is?
The estimates,
or 40 million.
Is that
40 million?
Her proposal would raise like $340 billion a year for the government.
Yes, and $340 billion a year over the course of a decade. No. That's a different thing. Sorry.
Okay.
And so, okay, that's just the wealth tax. We all understand what that is. Moore versus United States has nothing to do with the wealth tax per se. During the Trump years, there was as you know, there was a huge tax break given to wealthy people in this country. And one of the tax breaks, they gave up on the idea that money made overseas would be taxed once it's repatriated to this country. And instead, under this Trump law, they did a one-time tax that over the course of the next 10 years, that taxed not on your realized profits, right? Which is, like, for instance, I buy $100 worth of stock, it goes up and it's worth $200. I don't get taxed until I sell that stock and make $100, and then I get taxed on that. This is a little bit different because they were having trouble figuring out There was basically a huge tax loophole where you could make this money and then shove it into a foreign entity and then hold it off the American, outside of America and keep it out there ad infinitum, and you don't get taxed until you repatriate it. Now, what they really should have done is just said, no, you just pay your taxes every year. That whole repatriation was instituted during the Eisenhower administration as a way to grow Europe and Japan, essentially, as part of the Marshall Plan. It was a tax break. So this case is about a family, the Moore family, who had invested like 14 grand in a company, according to them. And it was really more of like a friendly type of thing. 2017, these investors paid $14,729 in their taxes due to the one-time tax provision in the Trump tax bill. They had invested more than that. They then sued to get the money back because of a convoluted argument that they're making about the Constitution. I don't really know how to really express it to you, but it has to do with like that taxing on unrealized income, because this was the value in the company and it was measured at that moment, but it had not been realized because they hadn't sold their shares in it yet, is unconstitutional under some provision in the Constitution that says states must direct taxes apportioned among the several states that exist in there. That provision has more or less been left by the wayside in over 100 years worth of jurisprudence. These people are trying to revive it by saying that you cannot tax these gains because they are unrealized. Obviously, the American system of taxation is not in limbo because of this $15,000. But if the Supreme Court rules that you cannot tax unrealized wealth, essentially, then a wealth tax is basically done because it's sitting in a home, it's sitting in an investment, it's sitting in the bank. You need to wait until there's some type of profits, whether it's interest or whether it's capital gains or whatever it is. And that's what the Supreme Court could rule. And they've been coming for this for a while because they want to prevent, in the future, the ability of name who you think is going to be president in 20 years, AOC to come out and say, we're going to do a wealth tax.
Yeah. I mean, has there ever been a broad challenge of the ability of the Supreme Court to engage in judicial review in a preemptive fashion? Because to me, that seems like it's quite not necessarily in keeping with its...
Well, there's two things.
With the role of the Supreme Court.
One, they won't come out and say you can't have a wealth tax. They'll simply say the U.S. government cannot tax on unrealized gains, which would foreclose a wealth tax, but would address this specific question. The thing that's come out, though, is it turns out like these shareholders, they're saying it's an unrealized gain, but they're also sort of lying about their relationship to the company, because this is relevant because they're presenting themselves as simply investors. But if they have a certain amount of control of the corporation, then it just becomes a question of like it being corporate profits, which are all very taxable, even if they're unrealized. Or I should say corporate revenue, which is taxable, even if it's unrealized profits for an individual. Long and short of it is, we'll have somebody on when this comes up, but I think it's going to be resolved. They're going to hear the lawsuit in the coming weeks, December 5th. So I guess a week from today. Maybe we'll get Millhiser on to talk about
My
that.
birthday.
Yeah.
But keep an eye on that. Oh, is that right?
Well,
Sorry.
And George Armstrong Custer's.
Congrats. You get oral arguments about the wealth tax
Lex
for your
last
birthday.
yes.
Is that what you asked for?
Exactly.
Dr. Chaos MD, would killing the wealth tax via the Supreme Court also kill the estate tax as we know it? If the estate is not liquidated, no gains would be realized and therefore untaxable. I don't think so, because you're still transferring. It's unrealized relative to the estate. But at one point, it's new money to somebody else. So I don't think it would impact the estate tax, but I guess that's a good question for when we talk to a legal expert on this.